Hi, I'm a relatively new listener, and I wanted to ask a question about non-aggression,
Mhm.
the non-aggression principle. And what I specifically wanted to know was that when we're talking about justice, how much force is appropriate in response to someone, taking the active use of force? Like, I think this is pretty relevant because of all the George Floyd's protests and stuff. But um, I've heard two different things from libertarians about it, and one is that you can respond proportionally to the amount of force used within the realm of justice, and the other one is that you should use the minimum amount of force possible in response. That's all I really have, but thank you. Joko
That's
2020.
Joko 2020.
Sure, 2020.
Um, Joko 2020. So that's a good question. So
Yeah, and Joseph, thank you for calling in. We do appreciate it. Anybody
yeah,
else?
thank you.
Anchor.fm/muddiedwater/message.
Yeah, we always love to hear questions, especially from first time people. And I'm really grateful that that was like a legit question. I was a little concerned. I'm always concerned when we get a new person. I think, oh, what's about to happen? So, especially when we haven't listened to it already. So proportionality versus minimalism. So, there's not much. So there's a fine line between the two, right? So proportionality is the idea that the stereotype of the non-aggression principle is that, and you'll hear this a lot, is that, if you own a piece of property and someone, walks by and their foot touches the outside perimeter of your property, they have committed aggression against you, and therefore you can drop tactical McNukes on them, or you can, enslave them and their children because they were the first ones to do aggression, and anything you do to them afterwards is, an act of defense. It's a defensive action, and so you can do whatever you want. That's nonsense, obviously. Proportionality is the idea that, and there's some subjectivity to it because it's ultimately up to the people who are arbitrating such a thing to determine what is proportional. But it is with the idea that whatever level of force or counter aggression defense is needed to stop, and not just stop, but actually prevent the continued aggression. So, for example, if I were to try to punch someone and they were to, they can choose to just block my punch, or they can choose to block my punch and punch me back. It would be arguable, given the situation, that they wouldn't have the right to pull out a gun and shoot me. Now, maybe if they are an elderly person that doesn't really have the ability to defend themselves, and, my punching them is actually potentially a threat to their life, then that's a different situation. But given a typical situation, punching back or fighting back would be proportionate. The idea of using minimal force, that's more of a judgment call than anything, because there are some people that maybe aren't pacifists, where they would just sit there and let you punch them, but they only want to use whatever minimal amount of force would be allowed to stop that person. So, for example, I'm trying to punch someone, so all they do is push me back, or block me and say, "Stop punching me, I don't want to fight you," and they just keep doing that until I stop, or until someone else intervenes or something like that. Whereas someone with proportionality would say, "No, I can fight back to stop them, to stop you. I may initially just block you, but eventually I'm going to fight back because you started a fight, and I can use proportional force to stop you." So one is more of a, I guess, a moral slash judgment call, and the other one is more of a what, within the guidelines of the NAP and within the guidelines of the ideas of non-aggression, what is allowed. I tend to side on the idea of trying to use minimal force, with the idea that if they don't stop, you can escalate it into something more. Because I'm just generally a non-violent person. I want to try to find a non-violent solution to any situation. But if a non-violent solution is not available, then that kind of lends itself to having to use more force. As that relates to defensive violence against the state, when you are dealing with an entity like the state, you're now no longer just looking at the moral subject of what is justified. you're also looking at the subject of what is actually effective versus what is just going to make yours and everyone else's life harder. So in general, I tend to say that even if you may be morally justified in using force against the state in a defensive manner, if at all possible, not to do so and to exercise your other options. And again, that is up to the individual, but I recommend that for two reasons. Number one, I am not, even before I was running for office, I am not in the habit of advising people to break the law. And number two, it usually doesn't work. Very rarely does violence against the state do much more other than cause more violence to come from the state. But in terms of just generally speaking, I think that would be the answer to your question regarding proportionality versus minimal use of force.